My daughter is only 7 years old, but she overturned a trial that I thought I would lose. I used to think truth and motherly love are enough to protect children from a toxic father. But I was wrong. In that cold courtroom, the man who once shouted at me in the kitchen now stood in front of the court with a calm smile, accusing me of being an unstable mother. And then when I was at a loss for words, Mila stood up. A small tablet, a video, a little girl said something I didn't dare. I will never forget that moment. Right in the middle of the child custody trial, my ex-husband, Damon, looked straight into the judge's eyes, his voice cold as if he was stating the obvious truth. She is unstable. She lied to our daughter. I want full custody. I heard every word clearly, but it felt like there was no more air in my chest. My throat was dry, my heart was pounding, but I couldn't speak. I can't say anything. I just sat there dumbfounded in the cold wooden chair, watching the man who said he loved me turn me into a danger to the very girl I love more than anything, baby Mila. The girl sat behind me holding my mother's hand. He was only 7 years old, but his eyes at that time seemed to understand everything. She knows I'm falling apart, and the most painful thing is no one threw me a lifeline. Damon sat there in a navy blue suit, neat and confident as if he was about to give a TED talk. Calm face, smooth speech, without a trace of emotion. As for me, the ex-wife that he once scolded just for ordering the wrong dish, he painted me as a failed mother. I want to object. I wanted to stand up and scream. I want to tell everything I have endured, but my mouth only let out a shaky breath. My lawyer looked over. Silent. The whole courtroom became silent, and I just clenched my hands to keep myself from falling apart. I thought I had failed, that I was about to lose Mila, and no one in this courtroom, not even the judge, can see the truth being distorted word by word. Until I heard a voice ring out, small, clear, and strangely calm. "Your Honor, I brought a video from Dad's phone. I think everyone should see it." The entire room seemed to be drained of air. I turned my head. Mila was standing up holding a pink student tablet. His tiny feet stepped forward across the row of wooden chairs past the man who was trying to take him away from me. His father. The baby doesn't cry. No shaking. No fear. There was just chilling courage in the child's eyes as he handed the tablet to the judge. "I didn't know she had a phone with her. I don't know what you recorded. And even more unexpectedly, I chose it right now to stand up for my mother." The judge asked lightly, "What is this?" Mila replied clearly, "It's from last weekend. Dad said those things when he thought I was asleep. But I heard everything. I think, if people don't believe you, maybe they will believe you." I was dumbfounded. That was the moment my heart was both broken and mended. My child, only 7 years old, spoke for me about what I thought I would have to endure alone forever. The judge plays the video. The whole room fell silent, only Damon's voice rang out, completely different from the calm look from before. "Try telling someone. Let's see what happens. You'll be sent to an orphanage. Your mother can't save anyone. She's just a failure." The sound of a chair being pulled, the sound of discs colliding. Then Mila's voice, soft as a breath. Sorry." Damon shouted loudly, "Shut up! You're lucky to be here. Don't say a word to him." The judge stopped the video at that moment. The whole courtroom seemed to freeze. Damon's lawyer opened his mouth to say something, but the judge raised his hand, decisively. "Enough." Then she looked at Mila. "Thank you for being brave." Mila nodded and walked slowly back to her seat. At this time her shoulders began to sag. "You don't have to strain any more." I wanted to rush to hug my child tightly, wanted to whisper in his ear, "I'm so proud of you." But I didn't do anything. Because at that moment, my child, the 7-year-old child who once asked me, "Are you afraid of Dad?" just saved both mother and child from the abyss. After the video ended, the entire courtroom was suffocatingly silent. Damon sat motionless, his face drained of blood. His lawyer stammered about to say something, but the judge raised his hand to stop him. "She doesn't need to hear more." She turned to me, her voice calm but powerful, declaring that full custody would be temporarily assigned to me. Damon is only allowed supervised visits with his children and must undergo a psychological evaluation before any changes. I couldn't believe my ears. Part of me wanted to cry. The other part just wanted to hug Mila tightly. Damon stood up, reacting violently, but the court staff immediately walked over. He was invited out of the courtroom in front of everyone's shocked eyes. I looked over at Mila. She was sitting quietly in my mother's lap. At that time, he just nodded lightly, as if he could finally breathe after a long nightmare. I walked over, knelt down beside her, and whispered, "You did great, Mila. I'm more proud of you than anything." The child said nothing, just rested his head on my shoulder, strangely small and strong. We didn't go home that day. I took Mila to my mother's house, a safe place where no matter how tired I was, I still felt at peace. My mother cooked a pot of soup. She always did that on days when her emotions were too heavy. "There are times when I need something to stir, to feel like I'm in control," she said. Mila sits painting at the kitchen table. A moment later, she brought me a drawing. 2 hands are holding each other. In the middle is a small heart. Below is scrawled, "Truth is courage." I looked at the drawing, tears welling up in my eyes, for the first time not from pain, but from relief. A deep relief reached the bottom of my heart, as if I could finally breathe after years of living in panic. That evening, mother and son reopened the jar of truth we used when Damon and I divorced. Inside were pieces of paper with all of Mila's questions, from innocent things like, "Why do people snore?" to heart-wrenching lines like, "Dad, will you stop loving me if I stay with Mom?" Today my child pulled out a piece of paper and gave it to me. "When the truth hurts others, should you say it?" I asked him if he wrote it. He nodded, then mumbled, "I don't want you to be sad. I just don't want you to be scared anymore." I held her hand and squeezed gently. "The truth sometimes hurts, but silence prolongs that pain forever. You did nothing wrong, Mila. You protected yourself, and you also protected me." The child did not answer, just sat there looking toward the sparkling glass jar and whispered, "So, shall we continue?" I nodded. Every night. 4 weeks later, the final trial took place. Reports from psychologists show that Damon tends to be controlling, gets angry easily, and lacks the ability to empathize with children's emotions. Combined with the video and Mila's testimony, the court decided that I had full custody. Damon is only allowed to see Mila twice a month at a monitoring center. No more long weekends, no more worried eyes every time my child returns home, no more soft threats echoing behind closed doors. As we left the court, Mila held my hand and asked softly, "Mom, is that over?" I don't want to lie, but I also don't want you to worry more. I just smiled and replied, "It's safe now. I don't have to be afraid anymore." That night, when my child fell asleep with Pepper, his favorite stuffed penguin, I sat alone by the window looking down at the street. The lights are still on, the cars are still running. The world is still as noisy as ever. But inside me, for the first time in years, there was silence. A peaceful silence. I no longer have to strain myself. No more having to keep things quiet so Mila wouldn't see her mother's internal collapse. Now I know, being a mother doesn't mean having to be strong all the time. Motherhood means being vulnerable and then getting back up again. Next to you. Because of you. I tell this story not to evoke pity. I tell this so that a certain mother, sitting quietly in the middle of the night holding her child helplessly, knows that she is not alone. I used to be afraid that my truth would not be big enough, not strong enough, to drown out the voice of someone who knows how to play a perfect role in front of the world. I used to think, who would believe a single mother who is always late, always tired, and sometimes bursts into tears in the kitchen because she can't cope anymore? But then I realized some people don't need to scream to make the whole room listen. Sometimes the truth comes from a small, clear, unexpectedly courageous voice, like my daughter, Mila. She showed me something that even in my adult years I never learned. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to be afraid, but still move forward. Mila doesn't need to force herself to be an adult. You just need to be yourself, a child who knows clearly what is love, what is hurt, and dares to say it, even if trembling. That day, you not only saved me from losing in the courtroom, you saved your own childhood. And in that moment, I no longer saw myself as a guide. I am the one being led. Since the trial, I started going to therapy. It's not because I'm weak, but because I've been strong for so long. I learned how to not just survive, but truly live. Mila started painting more. The paintings are no longer windowless houses or grey skies. I draw a tree with roots, sunshine and children holding hands. I put a picture of the bottle of truth on the wall above my bed, and every night I remind myself, Mom, remember to open the bottle. One night I pulled out a piece of paper where I wrote, "Are brave people afraid?" "Mom?" I smiled and hugged my child. "Yes, but they didn't let fear end the story. I know there are still many trials ahead, many papers and many unnamed worries. But what I know most clearly is this: we are no longer afraid. Mila no longer has to stay silent in the corner of the room, no longer has to write the truth in a jar that no one dares to read. And I, after many years of living in isolation, finally straightened my back and lived because I was no longer struggling alone. If you are reading these lines and your heart is aching, then perhaps you are also carrying a pain that others cannot see. Trust me, you're not crazy, you're not weak, and you're not wrong. Sometimes you don't need to shout. You just need one truth and one person who dares to say it. Maybe that person is you, could be your child, and maybe this story is the spark you need to get started. Thank you for staying until the end. Thanks for listening. We don't need to be perfect to be heard. We just need to be real enough. And truth is always the beginning of freedom.